outside. If you stay in here, you need to maintain your composure. Okay. Are we ready to proceed?
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
Who's going to be the next witness?
Dr. Mark Kroll.
Okay. All right, bring the jury out, please. I'm not sure there's a bailiff over. Yeah, just. Oh. Okay. All right.
I told him to come in when he's ready. I think he was.
Okay. Just let me know when they're ready.
I started out with 8 pins. I'm down to the quality by choice. I have no idea what I've done with them all. Oh, man. Oh. Yes, right.
Can I get a phone number?
I ain't got a phone. Oh my God, you got one too.
Phone number. 706. All fours.
Hello. How are you?
706.
Issue my phone as an office, so if you want to get contempt for that.
Yeah, that would be a terrible thing.
Please don't get held in contempt for testimony.
Take the ball off of it. Yeah, the ball off.
Ball off. I got you.
Obviously, the big chart. I thought that's what it was.
Okay,
Is this, you know, this guy?
sure.
I was looking around, I didn't see the.
Oh, our board.
It's back there, it's fine. You don't need to.
You want me to put it closer to you?
If you
Yep.
want.
I don't have to carry it.
Password that you're putting in. Okay.
He's a smart guy.
I know, I've been reading the 18 pages.
I wouldn't dick around with him.
But you are the,
No, I'm not.
James 1210 Roy Road. Everything on the map's Roy Street. Sign says Roy Road. It's been Roy Road forever. So whenever patients are like trying to get it.
for some reason, you got magnets, so.
Well, good. It's amazing. You know, I wanted to have a suit pressed, and I told you that the dry cleaners brought everything that we need within, shouting distance.
Screw around on negotiation stuff. This is the most.
I don't like that. But it's for the jury to determine who's an expert, no matter what department. That's what I do, is just say, no, 11, for say something along those lines. It's- We should say that's objective and testify.
He was gonna move Charlotte or something. I remember he told me about it. My mom was walking around with his wife.
Well, sometimes when you have people less qualified,
So my mom was like, Charlie, you need to go talk to him.
kind of pick up their
And John always
qualifications.
tells that story, and I love it. He's one of my favorite
Hey,
people.
I want to board here, and maybe you can make a couple of points.
No.
Like with the next guy that's coming up,
And his kids, I mean, they're all, everyone, they're so
since it's kind of a junk science, and it's been disapproved in this state and that state and this state, right?
different than
And say, I'm gonna move, he'd not be allowed to testify, but they probably will, but then here's
son-in-law
that.
Walt Green.
Okay, I got you.
Or you can just decide it has more impact if you don't make the judge is gonna testify, they have discretion. Since they will just say that in for cross-examination.
Pretty sure. Could be. They're all, Charlie's fantastic. He's, that whole group, man, they run.
Think about you and me, if we're jealous.
Well, you know, growing up, like, that group was such a cool example of, like, professional people working together in an environment where they all worked hard, they all got
No,
along.
Your Honor,
They insist
this
on
courtroom feels so different without the plexiglass in here.
like,
And that's from 4 years ago.
Yeah.
That was really weird.
Some things do change for the better.
you know? Seeing people in their field who figured out that it's better together. can take your whole bag up there with you if you want to. At the end, of the lecture, at the end, everybody leaves, you can stay, and you get one-on-one. And I'm telling you, there's like adults, they want to ask questions. He was just going to all of the kids, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds. You know how many of those kids are from prep? I had like 12 kids, not from prep. And we didn't all go together. I was like, I said something to the head of the lower school, like, bragging on you guys. But y'all shut up. Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
They're ready.
All right, I think we're ready. May be seated. The defendants may proceed.
Yes. Would you raise your right hand? Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Will you please state your name for the record?
Mark William Kroll, Kroll.
And Dr. Kroll, if you could please just introduce yourself to the jury and briefly tell the jury about what you do.
I'm a biomedical scientist with a specialty in bioelectricity and with a special focus on the effects of electrical shocks on the human body.
And what specific fields have you worked in?
I've worked in the application of electrical shocks for therapeutic uses, such as defibrillators, external and implantable, and pacemakers. I'm involved in cancer research now using electrical therapy to burn out tumors, both benign and dangerous tumors in the prostate out of Australia. And I work in electrical safety around the world. Those are the primary areas.
And you do a fair bit of teaching too, do you not?
Yes, I teach biomedical engineering as an adjunct full professor at the University of Minnesota.
And what are your various teaching roles?
Well, I teach students at the University of Minnesota, but my primary focus of teaching is on teaching physicians about the effects of electricity, such as shocks and dangerous shocks and lower level shocks, because that's not covered in medical school.
Now, do you sit on any boards or committees?
Yes, I sit on the International Electrotechnical Committee out of Geneva, Switzerland, and we set the fundamental electrical safety limits for the world from which a lot of electrical safety standards are derived. I sit on the ANSI Committee for Electronic Control Devices. So, and ANSI's important here because they set the standards for motorcycle helmets, safety glasses, and all kinds of things. Then, naturally enough, they have a standard that covers Taser brand electronic control devices. I sit on the board of Hemonetics in Boston. We make plasma extraction equipment. If you've ever sold your plasma, that went through some of our machines. And then I sit on a number of nonprofit boards.
And have you advised any well-known agencies or companies outside of just those boards that you mentioned?
Yes, I've been advisor to, on the effects of electric shocks, et cetera, United States Department of Justice, United States Navy, the government of South Africa, City of Chicago, New York City, a number of cities, and as far as the electronic control devices go.
So you've been studying electricity and the effects of electricity for quite a long time. How did you get your start as a biomedical scientist or a bioelectrical scientist?
I was an electrical engineering major at the University of Minnesota in 1970, and there was a note on the bulletin board that said that Medtronic, the pacemaker company, was looking for a student aide, and I applied for the job. So I got started in this business 55 years ago.
And what is you mentioned just now some of your experience in college. What is your formal post-high school education?
I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics, master's and PhD in electrical engineering, and a master's in business administration.
And please tell the jury about your corporate work history.
Well, I started working at Medtronic when I was a student. Then I worked in a family business that did electronic weighing. If you ever, anytime you fly in a jet plane, that plane was weighed by our family business. That was my brief vacation from bioelectricity. Then I worked for Trinity Medical developing a new EKG. Went from there to Angion developing a small implantable defibrillator. And then I ended up at the number 4 pacemaker company and ran engineering worldwide for a while and retired as the chief technology officer. Was St. Jude Medical, now it's called Abbott Labs. The same people that make the infant formula also are the number 2 pacemaker company. I retired I retired 2005 to spend more time teaching.
So what about the last 20 years, starting around that time where you started teaching around 2005? What does your employment look like since then?
Well, I don't have a full-time job. I'd like to retire someday. So I consult with various companies and various government agencies on these topics of the effects of electrical shocks and lecture on that. I write articles, I write books. I do the normal boring scientist stuff.
And at some point, did you become involved with Axon, the company that makes the taser?
Yes, in 2003, they asked me if I could get involved because they wanted to make sure that their weapons did not affect the heart. They're very concerned about maximizing the safety of these electronic muscle controllers that they make, because the idea is to lock up the muscles and not affect the heart, which would be electrocuting somebody. So I got involved in their board back in 2003 and stayed on their board for 21 years and left that almost 2 years ago.
And you were compensated for your work with taser, is that correct?
Yes.
Does your compensation from them over the course of your work in any way influence your thinking?
Your Honor, I would object to that question.
I'm sorry, say again.
I would object to the question about whether his relationship to the company affects his judgment. That would be bolstering the witness.
I mean, exploring his bias or the lack thereof.
Okay. Sustain the objection at this point, but go ahead with your next question.
Yes, Your Honor, I'll move on from that. In the work that you did with Axon, can you provide sort of an overview of what type of consultation you provided?
I gave them some advice on how to optimize their waveform, because you want to strike a balance between capturing the muscles, to lock up the muscles and not affect the heart, and did a number of studies on the dangers, because there are some risks, people falling or the device igniting gasoline fume fires and probes going into the eyes, the biggest danger. Published papers on all of those topics and help them work with the United States and international standards organizations to make sure they're compliant with these standards and to get these standards updated.
Is it fair to classify your consultation as consulting on safety?
Yes.
So will you please share with the jury any sort of major awards that you've earned in your field of bioelectricity and bioengineering?
I was given the fellow honor from the American College of Cardiology for my work in educating cardiologists, fellow honor from the Heart Rhythm Society for educating cardiac electrophysiologists, those are the people that put in pacemakers and defibrillators. I'm a fellow from the Engineering and Medicine and Biology Society, that's the international society, and a fellow from the American Institute of Medicine and Biology and Engineering, that's part of the National Academy of Science. The one award that I'm most proud of is in 2010, I was awarded the International Career Achievement Award for the Engineering, Medicine, and Biology Society.
And have you been recognized in the field of medicine for your biomedical contributions?
Yes,
You lecture a fair bit as well, do you not?
yes.
And where are most of your lectures?
I've lectured in, well, mostly teaching hospitals with major universities. Thinking around George, Emory comes to mind. I've lectured in 44 states and 38 countries.
And so you've lectured internationally on these topics as well.
Yes, in September I was in India doing an invited lecture on electrical safety, on the electrocution risk of certain types of shocks.
You have also published fairly frequently in your field as well, have you not?
Yes.
Do you hold any other records or achievements for inventing in the electrical medical device field?
I at present, and I stress present because I've got somebody creeping up on me, but at present I hold the record for having the most issued patents for implantable electrical medical devices.
Statements listed as exhibit, defendant's exhibit 42. I recall, do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
And could you please tell the jury what exhibit 42 is?
That is my curriculum vitae, the list of patents and papers and work history.
And Your Honor, we would the defense moves to admit defendant's exhibit 42.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor, no objection.
Defendant's 42 is admitted.
And Dr. Kroll, I'll just sort of note, numerous of these patents are implantable medical devices, cardiac devices, implantable defibrillation devices, systems for monitoring blood glucose levels. Dr. Kroll, is there a threshold for being awarded a patent, or is it just submitting an application?
Well, you can't just submit an application because 2/3 of patent applications are rejected. So the patent office has to decide that it's something that is new.
And in each of those, these are, I think you touched on this, these are patents that have been awarded.
That's correct.
Okay. You mentioned that you are a PhD doctor. I've been referring to you as Dr. Kroll. You are not a medical doctor, is that correct?
That's correct.
If you could just sort of distinguish between those two and help the jury understand why that distinction between a PhD doctor and a medical doctor matters in this context.
In the area of biomedical science, there's a lot of overlap and interaction. And it goes both ways, because I learned from cardiologists what things they're interested in and what areas they need help in for new technology and understanding. And then we also teach physicians a lot. So there's three basic differences between a biomedical scientist and a physician. Number one, we don't touch patients. We're not licensed, we're not trained to touch patients like a healthcare provider, like a physician, nurse, phlebotomist, EMT, paramedic, chiropractor, or dentist. That's the obvious one. Number two, what we work on, we hope will help thousands, if not millions, of patients. Whereas what the healthcare provider works on is usually one patient at a time. And I'm very proud of the fact that over 2 million patients have had my patents in their chest. Third difference is we give scientific advice to the physicians so they can then give advice to their patients.
So have you testified as an expert in any deposition or trial before?
Yes, over 100.
And have you researched the training received by engineers, medical doctors, forensic pathologists, medical examiners, coroners, and the like in the fields of electricity?
Yes.
And I know you kind of touched on the different roles of an MD and a PhD. How are those roles different in terms of studying electrical devices and the effects of bioelectricity on the body?
Medical schools teach 1,000 diseases and hundreds of parts of the body and about hundreds of drugs. So they can't teach everything about everything. So American medical schools teach to a national license and examination, and they are required to teach 3 things about electricity. 1, alternating current can cause fibrillation. That's a type of cardiac arrest. 2, lightning can cause asystole. That's flatline. And 3, electrical shocks can cause burns. That's it. And I don't mean to minimize the training. Training is wonderful. I'm very proud that 2 of my children have gone into the medical field, but they can't learn everything about everything.
And you briefly touched on this. Is there a specialty area in medicine alone that is devoted to exactly the type of field that you teach in?
No, there's 130 specialties in medicine recognized by the American Board of Internal Medicine, from oncology to pediatrics, and there's no specialty for electrical injury, electrocution.
And the papers and books that you've published, are these used to teach medical doctors about bioelectricity, the effects of electricity?
Yes, and they're almost always published in physician-oriented journals.
And is it accurate to say that you wrote the book on conductive electrical weapons as well?
Well, I co-edited both of the books.
Your Honor, at this time, I would offer Dr. Kroll as an expert in the field of biomedical science and electricity, operations and effects of electrical weapons, including benefits and risks, the biomedical science of biomechanics, and the effects of the effects of electricity on the human body.
Does the state wish to question the witness on?
No, Your Honor, the state doesn't object to his testimony.
Very well. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury, you may consider the testimony of the witness as an expert in the areas just enumerated by counsel.
Now, Dr. Kroll, obviously what we talked about a lot is your work you do in education, and I understand that there is a PowerPoint that you have provided for trial to sort of go over some of these topics. I was wondering if I could ask you to sort of take the jury through this PowerPoint and educate them on the topics that you'd like to cover.
I would love to, and I will try to make it fast so you don't have too much PowerPoint punishment today.
And if you just want to tell me when to advance the slide, you can proceed as you wish.
Okay. Well, this is about electronic muscle stimulators. They're not new. They've been around for a while, and here we see some of them being applied, people to get their six-pack back. And is it okay if I pull this out and show them? Okay.
You may.
And here's one that you can buy on Amazon. You put the electrodes on your skin, and then, well, I'm not going to show you what used to be my six-pack, but you get the idea. This go on your skin, and then you fire it up. Doesn't feel real good, but it's easier than a real workout. And these are widely sold. This is my favorite one because it's kind of got a racy box to it. Because all these people want to get their six-pack back, and the electrode here is one thing with 6 patches, and you put that on there, and then you plug the electronics into there, it snaps in. It doesn't feel good, I'll tell you that right now, but people do it. I interviewed a professional hockey player, and he said it was the worst pain he ever had, cranking it all the way up. And I said, why do you do it? He said, one thing, I need to strengthen my core for my profession, and I'm in control. I can crank it up all the way, and I know it's not going to kill me, and I know I can turn it off, so I just suffer through it. So that's basically muscle stimulators. You can turn them down so they don't hurt quite so much and get a cheap workout. Next one, please. And of course, since they're muscle stimulators, just like the taser devices, they put out very similar currents. So depending upon how good your connection is, that's connection impedance. Way to the right, that's not a good connection. Way to the left, that's a really solid connection. The aggregate currents are about the same because they're trying to do the same thing. The Oboboff RC4D, which is this one right here, I brought specifically because it puts out the most current. It puts out 2 milliamperes of aggregate current. That's pulse direct current. And then we have other brands that are a little less. The lower brown line there is the X26P, which is that issue in this case. They're all about the same. If you've ever used a TENS unit, they're further down. They're about halfway down. They put out about half of what the muscle stimulators do because they're just trying to confuse your nerves and not trying to lock up the muscles. Next slide, please. And of course, if you really want to go nuts, there are professional athletes and Hollywood types that spend $2,000 and they wear a suit where you're stimulating basically every skeletal muscle in your body for an intense, exhausting workout. And I had to experience all of these for my work. Here's me taking taser probes across my chest. Notice I'm wearing a face shield. The biggest risk is a probe in the eye. You will generally go blind if you get a probe in the eye. And there in the lower right-hand corner, you see the red up near my neck. I moved the shirt around and drew a little blood. And then the other probe is down in my belly. And that just drew a little bit of fat.
Now, at this point, I want to draw some comparisons, if you will. I know you referred to the previous chart comparing output. Your experience with these devices, would you conclude that they are equivalent, or else how are they different?
Well, they're both trying to do the same thing. They're
Okay.
trying to lock up muscles. The applications are, of course, vastly different. One is voluntary, one's involuntary. Although I volunteered for this, and so have millions of police officers around the world, they volunteered training. Again, sometimes required for the job, so maybe it's not totally voluntary. And since this is involuntary, and in fact, I think it's covered on the next slide, well, that's not yet. We have probes instead of patches, basically.
You mean the taser device would have probes, and that's how it's connected to the body?
Right, because it's got to go through clothes. Yes.
In the examples that you brought, these are patches that somebody places on their skin.
Yes.
And then on this slide, you've got here about FDA approval of these devices.
Well, since these are used for therapeutic applications, they have to be approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration. And you can go to their website, it's all open, and see the approvals on these different devices. And they're usually approved for 40 to 45 minutes. Here is the Slender Tone Evolve Abs, and it has a timer that ranges from 2 to 45 minutes. So they allow 45-minute applications, not seconds, 45 minutes.
And so when you've got the prior slide with the X26 output, does this device referenced in this slide produce anywhere in the same range of output of electrical discharge?
Well, it would have to, otherwise you wouldn't capture the muscles.
Is that the sort of limiting factor on how well these devices really work? Is their ability to lock up a muscle?
Yes, and there's another difference now that I think of it. These are trying to simulate a workout, so it's not continuous. Like in a police tactical unit, you need continuous lockup because you want to stop a fight. You don't want somebody to exert themselves until their heart stops. And then you can cuff them and get them in an ambulance, hopefully. These devices, therapeutic ones, they're designed to simulate a workout. So they give you a 3-second contraction, 3-second release, sort of like, think about doing push-ups. Okay? 3 seconds pushing and then release, off and on. So they're on 50% of the time. That's the big difference, probably.
But on a physiological level, the effect that it is producing, that these commercial devices are producing on a human body, and the effect that a taser device is designed to produce, physiologically, the intended result is the same.
Yes. So my favorite thing is looking at the FDA warnings. If you ever take a prescription drug and you look at the warnings, all that fine point font, you'd probably never take the drug because it mentions all the bad things that happen. So I went to the FDA website to look at their warnings on these muscle stimulators. And they said, basically, it's not going to give you six-pack abs. You're not going to get rock-hard abs. That was the main warning. I guess it has something to do with diet as well. Here's an example of the iStim you can buy on Amazon. It's $85 with 4 electrodes.
What does that mean? There's 4 electrodes.
Well, you can stimulate across 4 connections at the same time, because if you just stimulate, say, from your neck to your belly button, you may be going to lock up some obliques and some of the other six-pack muscles, but you'd really like to capture more muscle.
Now, how many connections might an X26 or an X26P that are both at issue in this case, how many connections do those produce?
2 connections, so it's 1 shock pathway.
When you say a shock pathway, what exactly do you mean?
There's basically one line where the current goes from the one probe to the other. It kind of spreads out a little bit like a football. It's not a wire, so it kind of spreads out, but it pretty much goes from the top probe to the bottom probe, if you will. And then you go to Amazon, you can buy the T7, which I believe is the same model that the bailiff has in court here today for $1,300. It's a lot more money, and it's not as convenient because it's got probes you have to stick in your body instead of like patches, but basically does the same thing. It's a continuous discharge. It can be used as distance, but I wouldn't use it for a workout. And here's the big difference: probes versus pads.
And so what we're looking at here is the top image. We've, heard you mention probes in reference to a taser. Is the image at the top what a probe refers to?
Yes, some people call them prongs, some people call them darts. You can barely see the wires. If the wires are really fine, the wires have about a 2-pound breaking strength that's weaker than the weakest fishing line you can buy. So one of the dirty secrets is the connection's broken all the time. If you brush at the wires or roll around, the connection gets broken. But they need to have them really small so they can pack 25 feet of wire into a tiny cartridge.
And if I'm noticing correctly on the top image, there's a bit of a recurved section at the tip of the probe. Is that correct?
There's a little bit of a tine there, like a fishing hook.
And is that to embed the device so that it doesn't just fall out?
So it doesn't bounce out of the skin. It's the same as a number 8 fishing hook. So why do law enforcement agencies use these devices around the world? They reduce injuries to suspects. The McDonald study was sponsored by the United States Department of Justice under Attorney General Eric Holder, 24,000 uses of force, and they found that the use of these electrical muscle stimulators reduced suspect injuries by about 2/3, any kind of injuries. The Taylor study, also sponsored by the same people, 12,000 uses of force, and they looked at subject injuries requiring medical attention, so more severe, reduced by about 80%. And that's where they're used. It's so much safer than clubbing people or piling on top of them. Next slide, please. And they reduce fatalities. Fatal shootings are reduced by 2/3, and all-cause mortality. This is something that's just generally not appreciated. Before these weapons came out, there was about a 1 in 1,000 death rate for resisting arrest. People are in bad shape. They don't want to go to jail, or they're not thinking straight. They got a bad heart, and they fight really hard with the police. The police get exhausted, and it's about 1 in 1,000 times they would die. Their heart would give out during the struggle. With the use of the electronic muscle stimulators, that death rate has fallen dramatically. It's about 1 in 3,500. It still happens. I mean, we have 200, this is called a non-firearm arrest-related death, just from fighting. 200 of these per year. That's four per week. I don't know if we'll ever get it lower than that, but people are working on it. There are real risks. I published on this about 8 years ago, and there were 20 fatal falls. If you're standing on say a bridge, or you're up on an elevated surface, or you're running really fast on concrete, and you get locked up in the back, and you have a probe high enough up so it controls the arm, you're not gonna be able to break your fall. And we're now up to 30 deaths from fatal head injuries and broken necks. People have gasoline fumes on them. You can ignite the gasoline fumes, and there have been 10 deaths from that. Like I said before, the big risk is a probe in the eye. If the probe goes in your eye, chances are you're going to lose the eye. You're going to end up with a glass eye. So there are real risks. The risk of electrocution is the one you think of because it's electricity, and that's zero. That's never happened. We think it could happen at a really small, skinny person if the probe hit their heart. And I even published on that possibility that we're kind of due, but it hasn't happened yet. So so far it's 0 out of 9 million. Now, one of the problems with explaining electricity is that there's dramatically different results depending upon the level of electricity. We've been studying electrical injury and electrocution for 150 years. When we first started electrifying country in the 1870s and 1880s. And so we know on the green area, we have really minimal response. If you were to have your fingers on, say, 1.1 milliampere of current, you could feel that. Women can feel that at less current. At about 5, it gets painful. And if you were to grab a wire with alternating current on it.
And you mean household electrical current?
Household electrical current. Let's say you're barefoot in your patio and you're changing a bulb and it's wired wrong. And you grab onto that, it would lock up the muscles, start to lock the muscles so you can't let go. And that happens in females at around 11 milliamps. They actually had people volunteer for this stuff, study this in the 40s and 50s. And for males, it's about 16. The Taser X26 is right around 13. It's right in there. They're trying to get somebody locked up. And then you get up in the red, you have risks. At 100 milliamperes, you can have a cardiac arrest. That'd be more of a skinny person, but that's generally taught as a safety limit. At about 500, it's probable, and at 1,500, you could have nerve damage. So that's the difference between getting hit with a tennis ball and a wrecking ball.
Now, milliamps. I'm not an electrophysicist, so I don't entirely understand. I'm wondering if you could explain, there's volts, there's amps. How do these measure electricity? What is that telling me?
Electrical current is just how many electrons are going down the pipe. So imagine you're trying to water your garden and you hook up a hose and you've got this 25-foot hose out to your garden, you're getting a certain flow out there, so many gallons per minute. That depends, and that's what current is. It's how many zillions of electrons per second is an ampere. That's just counting electrons. But it's a big number of electrons to get an ampere. It's worse than the national debt. And so we abbreviate it to an ampere, and an ampere is, well, 18 zeros, 6 and 18 zeros of electrons per second. Voltage is just pressure, and in some languages, it's the same word. So in your house, a typical household will have 60 PSI in the water pressure, and that's pushing, that's in the back, that's pushing that water out there. And then that flow is determined by how long is the hose, what's the diameter of the hose. So voltage really doesn't go into your body, it's the current. Because the voltage is the pressure pushing it out. Now, I mentioned before there's not enough current for electrocution. We know that from 150 years of research. But some people like to imagine that there's some new kind of way that you could be electrocuted that's not affecting your heart, but maybe causing stress on your body. This was a popular theory back in the 1890s. We didn't know how people were dying from electricity. They were putting up these generators, and somebody would just be found dead, and there was no marks on them. So it looked like a non-injurious death. So we started doing a lot of research on it. For a while, people thought that this was due to stress. And there was a theory that went back to Roman times that said you could not be electrocuted if you were sleeping. So if you were really calm, you couldn't be electrocuted. What that came from is when you're sleeping, you were inside your tent or your house, so you weren't going to get hit by lightning because that was the big risk. But that hung around till about 1895. And then they finally figured out what it was, that the electricity was getting into your heart and confusing your heart rhythm. That's how it killed you. So specifically for the issue of stress with these electronic control devices, this has been studied. And in this case, they took volunteers and they broke them into 4 groups. Group 1 had to do a 20-yard sprint. That's home plate to pitcher's mound. And they measured the blood before and after. Another group was in between 20 to 50, and then we got a 50-yard sprinter group, which you know what that is, that's half a football field. And then another 4 took a pretty severe taser hit. That was a probe up in the shoulder and down to the butt. So they lit up their whole chest for about 7 seconds. And they tested their blood before and after. There's 2 primary kinds of stress in the body. One is metabolic stress. If you do a really hard workout, you get tired because lactic acid's building up in your body and you're not able to make enough fuel to keep your muscles going. So they looked at lactic acid increases and they found that the X26 exposure there gave a peak of around 2 in the lactate, and that was less than a 20-yard sprint. So metabolic stress is not very high. I'm not going to say it's not stressful. I've taken 3 taser hits. I would rather have a can of beer in my hand and be watching a golf match on TV. It's much less stressful. But compared to alternatives like running and fighting, not so much.
Now, I want to make sure something's clear. You talk about testing blood and the stress on the body. Are you suggesting that the electricity itself is somehow having an effect on the blood? What would be producing the stress if not?
Well, you're getting a muscle contraction.
Okay.
And so muscles give off lactate when you're contracting. That's part of the normal process. And then that lactate is, the heart can burn up lactate, and then it can get stored, and it gets reprocessed. But it's a fundamental measure of metabolic stress. How hard is this on your basic fuel system?
So what you're measuring then here is what's more the result of the effect on the muscle, and not merely the application of electricity in general.
Correct. But I think this next slide talks about that a little bit. Another kind of stress is adrenergic stress, which is how hyper did you get? There are three primary hyperhormones. There's adrenaline, also known as formerly as epinephrine, noradrenaline, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Dopamine's a hyperhormone when you're really happy, really good mood because you just won a sporting event or something. So that's all been tested. So here is norepinephrine. And you get full body exposure to an X26, you get a little hyper. It went from a baseline level of 400 picograms per milliliter up to about 700 or more. But that has an effect. It was still less than running from a pitcher's mound to home plate. So still less adrenergic stress than you get from a very short run.
So these are two different ways to measure the stress of really the same types of events, whether it's metabolic stress measured with lactic acid in the blood, or sort of, is it fair to call it mental stress?
Yes, the norepinephrine and epinephrine levels correlate with the mental stress that you're feeling. The epinephrine is the short peak, but the norepinephrine is the longer one that lasts for several minutes. So yes, so one is really the blood versus the brain. That's a good way to put it. These devices, like I mentioned before, have an ANSI standard that strictly limits how much current they can put out over just a 2-to-1 bandwidth. You have to have a minimum amount to lock up the muscles and a maximum amount for safety. And all of the Taser brand devices satisfy the ANSI standard. That's what we know they're safe because this standard is been applied for millions of uses and probably a million devices.
And you mentioned ANSI before. They are not just certifying the safety of a Taser device, are they?
No, they do motorcycle helmets, bicycle helmets, safety glasses, just about anything you can imagine. And then we have the international standards and the US standards for electric fences. The first electrical control device was the electric fence, invented in the late 1800s. They used to be dangerous. People would die. Children on a farm would walk up, touch an electric fence barefoot in the rain, and be killed. So in the 30s and 40s, we started putting very strict limits on the output. They are limited to 7 watts in the United States. And the Taser brand weapons put out 2 watts. There's a weapon made in Brazil that's right at that 7 watts, but that's not sold in the United States.
And so the standards that you're talking about, these international standards, the devices that we're talking about, these Taser devices, are used internationally. The same ones that we use, the same ones that are at issue in this case will be the same as that are used internationally. Is that correct?
Yes, and I want to clarify something. The international standard is very strict at 2.5 watts. It's the Underwriters Laboratory standard, which applies in the United States, that allows 7 watts for these kinds of pulses. So the one you would buy at Tractor Supply be limited down there.
You're talking about the electric fence.
Electric fence.
Standards. But does a Taser device in the U.S. have a higher limit than a Taser device sold anywhere else?
No, it's the same.
Same device?
Yeah.
What's your electric fence?
By the way, I was going to warn you, if you want to touch an electric fence, don't do it barefoot. If you do it with shoes on, it's not that bad. But don't do it barefoot. It's a nasty shock. You have such a good connection. I love talking about the weird myths that have grown up. This is the Hollywood imagery, that these devices are shooting lightning out at people. And that's the image most people get from cartoons and Hollywood. And there's other weird myths, such as, and I'm not even sure how this got started, but somebody said you have to limit these things to 3 trigger pulls. It's called the baseball rule, and it's not really taken seriously. But there's no scientific basis to it. That's like saying 14 seconds of muscle lockup is okay, but 16 is not. which is pretty silly when the FDA approves these things out to 45 minutes. Granted, it's on-off, 3 seconds on-off, so it's really at 22 minutes. And then in some departments, they still teach you should transition after 3 pulls. If you don't have somebody under control with 3 trigger pulls, 15 seconds, you probably have something wrong. You should transition to what, a firearm? Sadly, that happens. There have been over 1,000 people in the country that have been killed because the taser muscle stimulator failed to control them, and a police officer was forced to transition up to the firearm. Electricity does not build up like a poison. It's intuitive that the more poison you drink, the worse it is, or the more bullets you take, the worse it is, or baton strikes. But electricity has 2 wires. Comes in one wire, goes out the other, and the effects generally last for about a second. If it's strong enough to kill you, it'll do so in 1 or 2 seconds.
What you just mentioned, if it's strong enough to kill you, it'll happen in 1 or 2 seconds. Is that what is meant by electrocution? I mean, is that the word that differentiates between what a taser is doing versus the type of injury that you talked about before when you get to 100 milliamps?
That's basically it. Electrocution is the dictionary definition. I should say, according to the dictionary definition, electrocution means a death caused by electricity. We just know that it takes 1 or 2 seconds. Another thing that I run into once in a while is people say, well, I know they've got all these studies, and you guys have been studying electricity for 150 years, and the taser devices for 20 years, the public studies. And so we know they're safe, but this guy had this problem or that problem. So it combined. That's not the case. If you have cancer, sadly, and you touch a high voltage power line, you're going to be dead, and it wasn't from the cancer. Cancer did not affect the electricity, and vice versa. If you die from cancer a few months later, sadly, the electricity had nothing to do with it. It's a standalone cause of death. Doesn't combine or contribute to anything.
And this is in line with what you said, that if electrocution is going to occur, it's going to occur virtually immediately.
Generally 1 heartbeat. Now, there were some drive stuns in this case, and in a drive stun, there's no probes involved. There are 2 little metal contacts and the muzzle. So you pull out the cartridge with the electrodes and then directly contact somebody. That current does not go down to the muscles. It stays in the skin layers. It's designed to be painful. But it turned out it didn't really work that well. That's what they used to have. Like these X26 had that feature, but didn't work that well, so they've dropped it. It's no longer sold in their new models.
So the X26, with the drive stun mode that you just talked about, you mentioned that the newer versions don't even include that as a feature, as a something that police could resort to.
That's correct. So if you were to go up to Atlanta and have a problem with Atlanta PD or DeKalb County, Gwinnett, no, the counties on there, they use the T10, which shoots out 10 probes and has no drive stun. So the drive stun is basically obsolete.
You know, I think we're having a bit of a technology issue with the remainder of this presentation.
We don't have any objection to taking a break. It's up to Your Honor or the jury if they need a moment.
If
Do you need some time?
we can take a moment to fix it, I think it'll help us get through this without the question and answer.
All right, let's take a 10-minute recess and hopefully get it done.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, that's paying compliance. And therefore, the company stopped making them with the drive stun. They've just dropped it from their newer weapons.
And that's what you referred to before with the T10. That is, that's a newer device, is that right?
It's the device they've been selling for the past 3 years. Like I mentioned, that's in the big cities are all adopted them, like Atlanta, et cetera. Now, with the drive stun, you get really obvious burn marks because those electrodes are 40 millimeters apart, like inch and a half roughly. And if you held it down for 5 seconds, you would leave these little square burns, and they're with that spacing. So they just jump out at you. It's very, very obvious. And these burn images are taken from our book on electrical control device wounds. And I think this was important to talk about in this case because none of these were seen at autopsy. Any of the photographs were observed by the medical examiner. So we didn't have any successful drive stuns, certainly none that lasted the full 5 seconds.
And I think you just mentioned that this would be the T10 device, is that correct?
That's a T10. It shoots 10 probes to make sure you get control.
Now, the 10 probes, is this 10 probes at one time? I mean, how does this function differently than the device that fires out 2 probes?
It launches 1 probe at a time. So if I wanted to stop you with a T10, and I would just start pulling the trigger until you stopped moving. So it just loads up to 10 probes in you.
You say stop moving, is that the same neuromuscular incapacitation?
Yes, so that's the whole idea is you would achieve neuromuscular incapacitation because many cases, especially what we found in this instance, you didn't get the neuromuscular incapacitation. The first 2 probes from Sergeant Copeland were just in the left arm. So that just controls the left arm, nothing else.
So, and I think, well, if we can move to the next slide, I do want to ask about the topic you just touched on. You talked about not achieving neuromuscular incapacitation. And previously you talked about the full body stimulators, the muscle stimulators. When you talk about neuromuscular incapacitation, functionally, what does that mean?
It means that you are controlling enough of the major body nerves, muscle control nerves, to stop aggressive behavior or lack of compliance. So for example, with the arms, if you have a probe up in the cervical region, and say a probe in the lower back, you will light up the musculocutaneous, the axial, and the radial nerves that control the arms. The person will lose control of their arms, and they won't be able to fight with their arms. And if the lower probe is at least a foot lower, it will light up the sciatic nerve and the femoral nerves, which control the legs, and then a person will fall over. So that's the ideal situation, which doesn't happen very often with these older weapons that just had the 2 probes. You have 1 probe high up in the back, 1 probe low in the back.
And I believe on this chart, well, what does this chart show us?
With the X26P, it records every single pulse, because there were about 19 and a half pulses per second. And this tells us if you had a connection or not. And this is an acceptable connection, right, sort of at a borderline. The blue line is what we're trying to push out. We're trying to push out 66 microcoulombs per pulse, because that's enough to get muscle lockup if you have good probe placement.
Now, I've got to stop you. What is a microcoulomb?
That is a small amount of electrons, very small amount. A coulomb is 1 ampere of current for 1 second. So if I were to talk about the water coming out of your hose at so many gallons per minute, that's not the total quantity. But if you were to fill up a gallon, now you know it's a quantity. If I got a whole gallon here. So that's the total quantity of electricity in each pulse. And it's very small, but it's very accurately determined to optimize safety, so even if you had a probe over the heart, you wouldn't have a risk, and to get muscle lockup.
So if you have an acceptable connection or a good connection, you mentioned two things. You mentioned pulses and muscle lockup. When the device is connected and activated, does it just turn on and stay on and the muscles constrict, or is there some other function as far as the pulses and the locking of the muscles is concerned?
You have slow twitch and fast twitch muscles in your body, and there are different ones that control fingers. Like these two fingers will be more the fast twitch, and these a slower twitch. And you can control the slow twitch muscles with maybe 15 pulses per second, but the fast twitch muscles you need closer to 30. So they have a compromise of 19 and a half pulses per second here. The newer ones are 22.
When you say pulses, do you mean that the device is turning on and off, or?
Shooting up narrow pulses.
Okay.
Like the T7, which the bailiff has here, or deputy, forgive me if I get that wrong. That's a little more modern device. That puts out 22 pulses per second to get a little better lockup. And these are designed to give a precise output. And these work kind of like a cruise control in your car. Let's say that you were to set your cruise control at 55 miles an hour. And you start off and you're going down a hill. And that's the green line, is how hard the accelerator is going, how much gas you're feeding into the engine. And in this case, we've got an acceptable connection, so the device says, you know what, I can back off on the gas. So you see that green line going down. If it's going up, that means you lost your connection. So it's going down until we have a stable 66 microcoulombs of charge per pulse, and then it remains roughly stable in that green line. And the borderline there of about 2,000 internal volts kind of tells you that this is an acceptable connection or not.
In your analogy, this would be the cruise control driving on a flat road.
Flat road, the gas pedal's in the same spot, your speed's in the same spot. So think about the green line as the gas pedal and the blue line as your speed.
Now, on this chart, we're seeing something much different. And I'll also note that it includes an image, a still image from one of the dash camera videos. Can you please tell us about this chart and how it relates to this image?
Certainly. So Deputy Scott, to get a good connection, lifted up that clothing article on Mr. Martin and discharged into the back. Unfortunately, as it turned out, the probes are too close to get muscle control, but there was charge delivered. And it was a really good connection because the probes are both in the skin and they're close together. And so what we see in the green line, the device said, well, I got a great connection. It's like going downhill in a car. I can back way off on the voltage. And then it stabilized at about 1,500 internal volts. And then at this point, where I show with the arrow, Mr. Martin has reached back and started to pull that probe out. And so we're getting a bad connection because the thing is going up. So he's loosened up, and so the green line's going up. We're losing our connection. But then later he gets a good grip on it at about 2.2 seconds and completely breaks the connection. Can we look at the next slide? I mean, just click it one more time. And see, at this point, he's pulled the wire out, and so we have now a complete loss of connection, and the green line's going up. As they're going up a hill, the gas is all the way to the floor trying to maintain that 55 miles an hour. So we can coordinate what limited video evidence we have with the pulse graphs.
So you mentioned 1,500 internal volts. Now, I'm pretty sure at my house it's 120 volts coming out of the wall.
Or-
That sounds like a lot. How do those numbers compare?
Well, that 120 coming out of your wall is continuous. These pulses are about 100 microseconds long. They're 100 millionths of a second long. So it might sound like a lot, but the pulse is so short. If you were to come up and visit me in Minnesota in the winter and walk across the carpeting and touch a doorknob, you'd know what 8,000 volts feels like, because you get a nasty static shock. But it's so narrow, your nerves feel it, but it's not going to hurt you.
Is the amperage, is that a factor in any of this as well?
Well, it is, but it's for a very short period of time. That's why we use coulombs for charge, because you can have really high amperage or current, but it lasts a very short bit of time. For example, a strong static shock can deliver 30 amperes. The human body, 30 amperes would fry off literally fry off an arm if it was continuous, or certainly do major muscle damage. But because the pulse is so short, nothing heats up, you're not really doing any damage, but you could feel it.
Now, is the goal of remaining at this proper level, the reason why it rises and falls, because it's trying to achieve, like you mentioned, that amount of charge to sort of take control of the muscle?
Yes, and to remain safe. The ANSI standard is very strict. That charge has to be within, I think, 45 and 100 microcoulombs roughly. So these are very strict standards that these devices have to be designed to.
So I know in this case, previously admitted were the two devices. Now, you've been provided with some material to review in this case, correct?
Yes.
And if you could, just what sort of material have you reviewed in this case?
I reviewed this consolidated video of the dash cams. I reviewed the 2 cell phone videos, the investigation reports, the pulse graphs, sadly, the autopsy report.
And was any information withheld from you that you requested to conduct your review?
No. The only thing that I wanted that I didn't get was the probes, Sergeant Copeland's probes, because he had an even older weapon, the X-26, not the X-26P, and that lacks these pulse graphs. You can look in the microscope at these probes, and you can tell if they've conducted electricity or not. And so those were never produced to me. Other than that, I got everything I wanted.
So were you able to form any opinions in this case based on the materials that you were able to review?
Yes.
And as a general overview, because I want to discuss them further, what were some of those opinions?
Well, the primary one was that Mr. Martin's tragic death was not due to electrocution. And I say tragic because I lost a...
Your Honor, I want to apologize. I know this must be emotional, but it wouldn't be relevant to the issues in this case. I know Your Honor will charge the jury at the end of the trial that they're not to consider sympathy for the parties.
And we can move on beyond that.
Yeah.
All right, please do.
So we had one close in our family.
So what we're getting at is what were some of, I know one of the opinions that you shared was that the death was not an electrocution.
Yes. And the use of these electronic control devices did not contribute to the death.
So I know that the devices that you referred to have been introduced to evidence. Your Honor, may I handle these evidence?
You may.
Pass it up to the witness.
Yes.
So I am handing you what is labeled as States Exhibit 21 and 22. They're inside the bags, but if you could handle these and take a look at them and tell us what they are. And I'm going to have some questions for you to...
Can I take this out of the bag?
Your Honor, may he remove it from the bag?
absolutely. No objection.
Absolutely.
First, I'm going to make sure that the cartridge is removed. And And I see I was trying to put the cartridge in for the battery, so the battery's been removed, so I can't do a demonstration. I will show you, these are the two contacts here for the drive stun. And this, I'm not gonna point at you because it looks like it's a usable cartridge. And there've been rare cases where static shock led to a discharge, and I don't want the probes flying around. And if this was put into here, then this is how the probes would come out, top and bottom, blowing those doors out.
So you mentioned, well, real quick, which device is that? Which model?
I gotta look carefully, because the X26P and the X26, which you now call it E, this is the older X26. So this is the one that Sergeant Copeland had.
What's the exhibit number, just for the record?
'22.
Thank you.
So between those two devices, what are the major differences?
This one, the X26P, records every single pulse in memory like you're seeing up there. That's a major difference.
Now, do they otherwise function the same?
Very similar. This older X26E did not have the cruise control on it, so it didn't deliver a precise amount of charge. So if you had a really good connection, it would deliver a little more. If you had a bad connection, it would deliver less.
Now, you mentioned that the X26, the device that Sergeant Copeland was carrying, does not produce this type of graph that I think previously we've referred to it as a pulse log graph. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, sir.
You also mentioned that some of the material that you weren't able to review included the actual probes from the X26 device.
That's correct.
Can you explain how analyzing the probes themselves could assist your analysis?
Well, if you deal with the older weapon like on the X26 without the pulse graphs, you still have marks left on the probes. The probe received the wire like an eye of the needle. And you can look at that under a microscope and see how much crud there is, what kind of deposit you get. If you ever played with electrical arcing with a battery or something like that, you can generate some crud in there, some metallic deposits. That's kind of what goes on. And that's been studied enough so you can look at it and say, yeah, this carried about 5 seconds or 10 seconds or 20 seconds worth of electrical current. So without the probes, we couldn't establish that, but the video evidence and the audio evidence was enough for me to come to an opinion on the duration.
And you did have a chance to review video and audio, is that correct?
I did.
And, well, before we move on to that, I want to make sure that we're using some correct terminology. There's been reference to connection and charge and discharge. When we talk about a good connection, what is it you're actually referring to?
Both wires have to be connected to the body, and a good probe spread would mean that they're a foot apart, typically on the back. Best if they're on the back.
Now, can probes be too far apart to work? Can they be too close to work?
They can't be too far apart to work, because then you get current through the whole body. But if they're less than a foot apart, you get a localized effect. For example, you're not going to, well, in this particular case, when Deputy Scott discharged the probes in at a close range, because they come out at 8-degree spread. And so when you're that close like that, they were only a few inches apart. So it was a very local effect, and you're not lighting up that many nerves coming out of the spine. And you're certainly not doing anything for the arms, because the nerves come out of the arm around between the 5th and 6th cervical vertebrae, control the arms. And so even though Deputy Scott was pulling the trigger, Mr. Martin had no problem had full use of his arms, reaching back and pulling the wires out.
Now, would he have still felt any of the effects of the device?
Depending upon his pain threshold, it would have been painful. A rational, sober person would feel pain. People in a psychotic or schizophrenic break tend to have extremely elevated pain thresholds. So based on his verbal response, he was feeling some effect, but it wouldn't be as painful as it would be for you and I.
Have you seen people get tased before?
Yes.
You kind of laughed. I assume you mean you've seen that several times.
Oh, hundreds of times in training and
And is that in probe mode and in drive stun mode?
usually probe mode, it's more impressive.
Now, in your experience observing this, do people react differently?
Yes, I squealed when I got my hit, and there have been people that can just suck it up and don't make a sound.
So you've mentioned that you reviewed audio, and that would be it's contained on the videos, and you've reviewed the videos as well.
Yes, correct.
And you've reviewed the pulse log graphs, and for the record, those are previously admitted as defense exhibit 40. You mentioned that there were no probes to review, to analyze with the other device, the X26 device. And you also mentioned something else, that there was a compilation. Can you describe, because I believe we're going to look at that, can you kind of describe what that is for me?
I believe it was the state put together the dash and synchronized them. So I was able to use that, or I'd like to use that, to explain my analysis to the jury.
So before we play any of that video, I want to ask you this. The video that we will see, is it meant, it's meant to get the times and the durations from the taser chart. And I know that we've previously seen this chart that has the times and the durations, the reference, the trigger pull. And I know that this was something that we previously discussed and that you've referenced. The video is meant to get the times and the durations from the chart and match them up with what we see and hear on the video. Is that just to help you discuss your analysis?
Yes, because I have other evidence to go off of.
Okay. So, and we've previously brought this video up with the state. At this time, can we review this video? And I'd like you to tell me where to stop so you can make any comments and explain sort of what your analysis is of what you're seeing and hearing, what you're observing, and then to share some of your opinions.
Great.
Do we have an exhibit number for this?
This is just a demonstrative, Your Honor. This
Okay.
is not being submitted.
It's not,
It utilizes the dash cam videos that were previously admitted, as well as the pulse log graphs that were previously admitted, and the raw data that forms the basis of the state's duration and time chart. Did it turn off again? I'm willing to try.
HDMI cable on your,
I can see, let me see. This works for our business. I apologize for that. Technology has a way of making this a little bit more fun. All right. You mentioned that you've reviewed these videos, and what I'm going to do now is just start with this video. You can tell me where you'd like me to stop and discuss with us what your observations are and what conclusions you reach based on this.
Hey, come over here. Come on, hey, come on, hey. Come on, get the road, get the road, get the road, get the road, man. Come on. Get the road, come on. Come on, come on. You got Tasing? Yeah. Tasing right here. Come on, come on, come on. Come on. Here's where you want to talk to you. Where you want to talk to you? Where you want to talk to you? Where you want to talk to you, okay? Where you want to talk to you? Where you are? No, come on.